Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively out of football season, despite what Orlando Brown or Eric DeCosta or even John Harbaugh and the draft people will tell you leading up to the NFL. Luke Jones, back when I was a young guy, this used to be baseball season. And as I welcome you on for a baseball segment, I want you to know I'm going to be redoing the office in here in the next couple of days into the next week. I think my friends over at MOI are going to give me a hand, and I've had a lot of people try to help me out with Ergo and get me right. But I've been going through old boxes of stuff, my friend, and when Hank Aaron died 2 weeks ago, you and I didn't talk much about Hank, but I told you my dad took me to see Hank Aaron, and I went looking for the ticket stub, all right? So I have all of my childhood ticket stubs here in one little area. Oh, I just dropped it. So there you go. There's May 21st, 1976 that I thought was the Hank Aaron night.
Very cool.
And I looked it up to see if it was the Hank Aaron night. I even laminated it back in my childhood, as I unfortunately did with my first Rush and Rolling Stones tickets and my Queen ticket, wrecking it. But it didn't wreck the Oriole tickets because they were sturdy back in the day. And as it turns out, it was not from the Hank Aaron night. It was a night when Doyle Alexander pitched against the Indians. It must have just been another night my dad took me to the ballpark, but it was within 3 weeks of the Hank Aaron game. So I give you that. And with that, I'm going to tell you about the story about the time my uncle got tickets from Chesapeake Cadillac. We sat right behind a dugout against the Indians. But it's baseball season. How are you? You honored your father, recently on a big birthday. The Orioles have extended the lease for 2 more years, so the team's going to stay here through your 30s. I guarantee it. Or as long as Fort McHenry's here. We almost lost the country 5 weeks ago. So I don't know, Luke. The Orioles are here for now, and maybe one day I'll go back to having field box ticket stubs.
Yeah, I'll say this, and we'll get into plenty of actual baseball issues, and we can dive into Masson a little bit. We haven't talked about that since those changes, but with the lease, look, I'm not going to sit here and say it's anything to do cartwheels over, because it's not. It's 2 years, and as I recently wrote at BaltimorePositive.com, while I haven't necessarily taken the stance you have taken on the lease issue, it remains an issue until it's not anymore. And when you're talking about a 2-year extension, it's still an issue. Now, I will say this. We're in the midst of a pandemic, and I don't think you're seeing many deals of that nature being struck anywhere at this point in time. I don't necessarily have any greater level of pessimism or optimism.
It wasn't a 30-year lease at 2.5%.
It wasn't. Well, and that's it's not going away. Right. I will say this, and this is where for me, I took a morsel of optimism where I don't feel any worse about it than I did a month ago. If we were talking about this, when you did see the release put out by the Maryland Stadium Authority, there were comments by both sides in terms of this being a step in an ongoing long-term negotiation. Nestor, you and I both know that if there's animosity, sometimes you can see a press release that's very quick, gives you the news, and that's that. Or maybe one side comments and the other doesn't. So that was one tiny morsel of optimism I took from that. But I think the reality is, whether we're talking about the Orioles, whether we're talking about the Ravens, whether we're talking about teams and the future of sports in general, everywhere, I think we're still in very uncharted territory here as far as what the post-COVID-19 pandemic, what post-COVID sports and events are going to look like. So I do think from that standpoint, it does make sense to kick the can down the road a little bit. But until there's a 20-year lease, a 30-year lease, until that's signed and official and being announced and there's a press conference for that, then, yeah, I understand there being some skepticism. I know the history of the city, and I understand, Robert Ursay and the hurt feelings that still persist today for many Baltimoreans. Doesn't mean I think the Orioles are leaving. But until there is long-term stability in that way, it's still a topic of discussion. Let's leave it at that. And until there is a deal that extends beyond the end of 2023. Keeping in mind, earlier in 2023, there is a 5-year extension option on the table as well. But until there's something that extends into I don't know, the 2050s, the 2006, whatever it would be, there's going to be some doubt, and this is going to continue to be a topic of discussion. There's no question about that.
Well, to me, there's nothing more important than that.
Sure.
And we're going to start at the top with the Orioles and work all the way through Alex Cobb and what the manager's name is and who the right fielder might be and who's going to start on opening day, let alone on the third or fourth or, dare I say, fifth day through all of this, and how they're going to play baseball, and fans are going to be able to go, apparently. And, I live nearby, which is nice for me to have an invitation to buy a $10 beer. I don't know. As I sit here and I hold these tickets up, and I will have some fun before all this is over with. Because let me be honest with you, dude. I got all these tickets in front of me, and this is my whole bag, right? So there's old Phillies tickets in here you can see from the Kurt Schilling era. Those are the little stubbies down here when Shonda would leave me tickets. This is the ticket that the night I got named Nasty Nestor right here. This is the Phillies, Dodgers, Eddie Murray hitting 2 home runs at the vet after the Orioles gave him away. So we lived through that, so we get Oral Hershiser, the whole deal. Fernando Valenzuela. So I guess we'll live through some more bad baseball here, and if the team really isn't going anywhere, and I'm not going to have any part in that one way or another, that if they're going to be here for the next 5 years or 10 years, people need to come back. They need to freshen up the logo, the field, the this, the that, the parking lot. They're going to own half a community. They're going to erect parking garages and bars and do all – I mean, that's what the vision would be, right? Then there's the team itself and what minor league baseball has become and where Major League Baseball is, and they want Mancini to give money back. Bring me up to speed, dude. Act like I've been under a rock here for a while. Act like your dad and my dad both came back and want to go on opening day, and explain to them exactly what the hell's going on with the franchise and who's on the field and why.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's been an off season where anyone's going to be getting excited. Beyond the commitments they did make as far as an international market, where they gave out their first 2 7-figure signing bonuses for international free agents, which is progress. It's something they hadn't done before. But beyond
when's the last time the last team did that? Was it like 1990 something, or was it like 2018?
I'm guessing it's probably
no team had ever been involved in that with that money.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing I don't know. I'm guessing it was sometime in the 2000s, but it's well documented. And believe me, this was not a Dan Duquette call any more than it was an Andy McPhail call before that. We know Peter Angelos' stance on signing international free agents was not to invest.
We don't want any foreigners around here, Lucas. You understand.
It's not that. It's the idea that those are very combustible investments. I mean, it's one thing to talk about even draft picks, talking about college players. It's another thing to talk about signing a 16-year-old out of the Dominican who may not rise above Frederick. I mean, not Frederick anymore, but you get my point. So, they were the one that was squeezed out.
Hagerstown, Prince Frederick.
Well, my point is, there's no guarantee with that. So if you are investing, not to say you shouldn't be investing, but there is a trepidation there for high risk and higher end investment, knowing that you might not get anything in return. Now, beyond that, it's very clear this is a team that's still very much in a position of not wanting to spend at the major league level for the major league roster. They're all in on player development and continuing to buy prospects. They did that with the Jose Iglesias trade. They most recently did that with the Alex Cobb trade, where Jahmai Jones, who actually was someone that they ate a little more of Cobb's salary to buy a prospect. So, they're and that was kind of a difference there. We've seen these trades where they were taking quantity, or they were taking long-term lottery tickets, like when they traded Andrew Kashner a couple summers ago. In the case of the Cobb deal, they actually ate more money, more of his 2021 salary to buy a better prospect from the Angels. So I think that was an encouraging, let me be clear, not encouraging to the level where get excited about that, but I thought it was at least interesting to see a little bit of a pivot there from Mike Elias. But this is still very much a long-term play. This is not a team I expect to be very good, obviously. But I will say this: if you're looking from a baseball standpoint, in terms of wanting to start seeing some progress, I think especially as this season goes on, even though recently they've signed Felix Hernandez to a minor league deal, they re-signed Wade LeBlanc to a minor league deal. Over the weekend, they signed Matt Harvey to a minor league deal. So people will dwell on that and say, well, they're building a rotation that could be really good for 2013. And I get that. And I have very low expectations, if any expectation for any of those guys. But we saw this last year with Ryan Mountcastle. We saw it with Keegan Aiken and Dean Kramer late in the season, pitching in September. I think over the course of this season, we are going to see Yusniel Diaz make his major league debut. I think we're going to see Michael Ballman and Zach Lowther and Alexander Wells. I think we are reaching a point in the rebuild where you're going to start seeing more guys that actually have a viable chance to be part of the next winning team here in Baltimore. Doesn't mean they're all going to make it. We know they're not all going to make it. We know how prospects work. That's always been the case. You can go back to bonus babies for the Orioles back in the 50s and 60s that never made it. So we understand that is part of it, but I do think we're slowly but surely starting to reach a phase where we're going to see fewer placeholders and more prospects. And that's not to say we're going to see Rutschman or DL Hall or Grayson Rodriguez this year, who are at the top of the list. But I do think we're going to start seeing more guys that are at least legitimate maybe type guys, rather than just a roster of 19 placeholders and a couple guys that are holdovers that and a few guys that have just no business being considered a legitimate prospect and aren't a legitimate prospect. So I think slowly but surely we're going to start seeing that. And I think just like the last couple of years, it's still going to be evaluating it on an individual basis, in the same way that John Means was a great story 2 years ago. In the way that Ryan Mountcastle was really exciting to watch at the end of last year and should be a legitimate Rookie of the Year candidate this year. In the way that Dean Kramer and Keegan Aiken had their moments at the end of last season to get excited about their prospects for making the rotation. I think you're going to see more of those types entering the fray here in 2021. And that's where I'm not going to say it gets exciting, because I still think this is going to be a team that's, drafting pretty early next year and still going to be losing, 95 games, somewhere in that neighborhood. I'm still expecting them to be a last place team. Don't misconstrue my optimism, but I think it's got a chance to look different in terms of looking at guys as ascending players rather than Alex Cobb and Andrew Kashner and just minor league free agents and waiver claims and
guys we've heard of, but we really don't want to watch play anyway, right?
Or guys you haven't heard of, but there's no reason to have heard of them. There's a reason to have heard of Dean Kramer, because we know he was one of the centerpiece acquisitions in the Manny Machado trade. But, the guys that we've seen over the last couple of years where they've been brought in as waiver claims. So, long story short, I think it's going to be another long season. Let's be very clear about that. But I do think on an individual case-by-case basis, we are getting to a point, especially on the pitching side, where you're going to start seeing some more interesting names. And I think just in a general sense, and this certainly applies to the Orioles when you consider how relevant and important their minor league situation is right now, I do think what's going to be interesting, and this could be a good thing, this could be a very bad thing, depending on how it turns out, is just the unknown volatility of the fact that you're going to have a lot of guys who haven't played ball in about a year. When you talk about some of these minor leaguers and, guys that were at the alternate training site at Bowie but didn't really play in real games, or, even the major leaguers, they had a 2-month season. So, there's a lot of unknown that's really going to go into this. But I do think what could be very interesting from an Orioles perspective is when you consider the investment they've made in terms of their development, in terms of technology, in terms of the coaches they brought in at the minor league level, and to see what kind of progress is made with this, for lack of a better term, I've called it a development by concentrate, that process that they had last year, because you had these guys at the alternate site at Bowie and they weren't playing double A or single A games because there were no minor league games. So what does that from concentrate method that they used on some of their higher prospects, what impact does that have? Does it actually? Do we find out that expedites the process for some guys? I think it's going to be interesting. That's been part of the, as much as we've focused on the minor leagues, consolidating and being condensed and contracted, and the negatives associated with that. There are a lot of really smart baseball people that have wondered if there's a better way to develop rather than just having guys play 130 minor league games every year. So we got a little, out of necessity, got a little bit of a taste out of that in 2020. So it is going to be interesting to see how, workloads are handled, how prospects who hypothetically should have been at Double-A Bowie last year, do they skip a level and they're at Norfolk? How does that all play out? I think it's going to be really, really fascinating. And there's just so much unknown involved with all of this just because of how unprecedented and strange and challenging 2020 was in that regard. The good news is, even though it's going to be on a delay, there is an expectation that we are going to see minor league baseball played, even if it's a little bit later into the summer.
He is Luke Jones. We are talking baseball. So we're different announcers. Anything you want to say about the Masson thing before I start geezing on these ticket stubs?
Yeah.
Because, Luke, I'm having a good time with the ticket stubs. I am going to bore the hell out of you. And
those are relics. I mean, you're not going to get those anymore. Those were already disappearing before the pandemic. They're certainly not coming back now.
I want to hold these up because these are legit and they're old school, and I want to go through a couple of these just to have a little bit of fun with you, because that's what you do when you find the ticket in the era of the internet. In the old days, you'd have to get like a book and maybe look up a box score or get microfiche. Now, like, I can look back on July 28th, 1975. And I remember the game vividly.
Who pitched in the 7th inning? It's right there. Baseball Reference.
Well, I was 7 years old, right? So, and I guess, this is where the Chuck Thompson and the Bill O'Brien or Bill O'Donnell and the John Millers of our youth and all of that, like, this is what you remember when you go to the ballpark, right? And you've got Masson stories, because I got some 1983 stubs here where I know Rick Dempsey's name's going to show up on this April 6th of 1983 stub I'm going to talk to you about. Out with the old, in with the new, all that. Yeah. I was never a fan of most of it to begin with. I'm sure I'm going to be a fan of it even less when they're spending less money on it. Part of it was sabermetrics and talking that. Part of it's money. Well,
big part of it's
money.
That's mostly money. Yeah. I mean, it comes down to this, and you just you stole a little bit of my thunder here. And look, I know I know these people. I see them at the ballpark, and I want to be respectful, and I'm not going to necessarily critique any one individual's work. I'll say this: it was handled very poorly, and I know that. I mean that. Look,
it always is.
Network
trademark.
Sure, no question. I'm not going to argue with you on that. I agree with you. But I will say this: networks regularly make changes. That's inevitable, especially in this market. I mean, we're seeing what NBC Sports Network is not going to exist anymore later this year, and understanding what that's going to mean for a hockey television contract and what have you. But it wasn't handled well. But that said, you just mentioned it, and it's not something that hasn't been uttered over and over as far as some of the people let go, not even attacking any individual, but lots of people were unhappy with what the product was in terms of the shows or pregame, postgame. We've talked about that for years and years and years. So I don't mind adding new blood. I will miss Gary Thorne and Jim Palmer, even if it was talking about the god-awful 2018-19 Orioles. When it was Gary Thorne and Jim Palmer doing a game, it still felt big league. There was still that you knew you were going to get a quality broadcast. So I will miss Gary Thorne. I'm not going to mince any words there. I do like Ben McDonald. We talked about this a lot last year. I'd like to see Ben featured. In the same way that he was featured heavily in 2020. I'd like that to continue. Jim Palmer is returning. That's great. I do think some of the younger broadcasters, there is potential there. As someone who's never done play-by-play, so I'm not going to sit there and try to critique that I would do a better job or anything like that, because I've never done it before.
I've done it. I stink, dude.
It's tough. So when you are going younger, and yes, cheaper, and I understand and agree with much of the cynicism in that regard. I understand that. I do think there's some potential there with some of the names to grow into the roles and grow into the jobs. But you can't help but look at this and just look at the financial ramifications of how much fat was cut from the budget, so to speak, in terms of how much more established broadcasters are making compared to people that are not as far along in their careers. So again, I don't really even have the major issue with making changes, but I know from talking to people, who have left the network, people who have left the network last year, even on the, behind the scenes, that it should have been handled way better. And I mean, if you want to make changes, make changes. I mean, that's going to happen, but it needed to be handled in a more professional manner, because you are talking about some names, whether you're talking about Gary Thorne, who had been here since what, '07, I think it was, '06, somewhere around there.
That's incredible that he was here that long.
Jim Hunter had been here since 1997. So whether you like a broadcaster or not, as a listener, as a viewer, there is still something to be said for treating people the right way, especially when they were people who were selling a product that, save for a few years over that period of time, was not exactly an easy product to sell. So beyond just, whether you like the changes or not, or you don't know, or you're not sure about some of the newcomers and wait and see on all that, it needed to be handled better. And that was a failure of the network and the organization. And as you pointed out, it's not the first time that's happened, and probably won't be the last time that's happened. And that's the part that's really disappointing to me. As far as all the changes, as I mentioned, I'll really miss Gary Thorne. As far as other changes, well, I'm willing to wait and see what the product looks like. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, even though I don't necessarily think that it's in a position where it's going to move the meter dramatically, but they are finally going to start offering in-market streaming for network subscribers. Now, that still means you have to have a cable or a satellite subscription. That is the case in most markets. There are, until though you're offering MASN on a YouTube TV, on a Hulu, something along those lines, it's probably not moving the meter dramatically, but it is at least a step in the right direction, because that's something I've been hammering, a point I've been hammering to you for 6 or 7 years now, in terms of, if you're going to subscribe to it, whether it's through satellite, whether it's through Comcast, whatever it is, my goodness, I should be able to at least bring up the game on my phone if I'm out at the grocery store and I'm trying to keep tabs on what's happening that night when Dean Kramer's on the hill or whoever. So it's not a major step, but it's a step in the right direction. But again, hard not to look at the MASN situation and just look at the financial viability of what's being done and what's going to happen here over the next few years, and clearly how that ties into the ongoing dispute with the Nationals, a case that just feels like it's never going to come to an end.
All right, so Luke, I'm going to bore you with some old baseball stories here, because you
never
deserve
bore
them,
me
and
with
your
that.
dad was an usher. So I'm going to just take – these are the earliest stubs I have. I don't know – I don't have any 72 or 73 or 74, although I did go to games. These are two stubs. You see the field box up top here and the $5 ticket? So the story is my cousin Nelson, who was still my Facebook friend and lives in Venezuela and has lived in Venezuela for 40 years now, his father worked at Chesapeake Cadillac, and he got the company tickets that night. And I remember this vividly because the company tickets at Chesapeake Cadillac, look, you want to check out where that seat is? That's field box BB5. That's the one that had like the little bars in front of it. It was like a little box seat, a couple rows. Section 6, we're talking right behind Billy Hunter, right behind third base at this time. Brooks is playing third base at this time, right? So they're playing the Indians in 1975. So I want to say Boog Powell, I think, may have just gotten dealt off over there, may have been in the lineup. Okay. I'm not sure. I'll let you know in a minute, because I haven't looked up the box
score. Is that when Cleveland had the red blood clot uniforms?
Probably, yeah, probably.
The red pants and the red jerseys.
Thornton, Hendrick, a little early for that.
Might have been, that might have been a couple years after that.
I'm sure it was something wacky. It was the Indians, you know what I mean? But nonetheless, Ken Aspermonte was probably the manager or something like that. I'm probably not wrong. But either way, so the field box tickets, my pop, they only had 4 tickets. So it was me, my paternal father, Nestor, Nelson, and his dad. There were 4 tickets. So my pop said, I'll just go out and buy a ticket. $1.50, my dad gets the upper deck seat. You can see that there with the rain check on it, right? And then what he does is proceeds to sit down with us in the box seats, okay? So that's kind of how you did things back then.
That was commonplace back then, right?
Hop the turnstiles, baby.
Yeah.
So this game here is July the 28th, 1975. And, through the power of Wikipedia and the baseball reference thing, I can actually go back and see there was a Monday night. And that's Rick Waits was the winning pitcher. Doyle Alexander, the loser there. They lost 7-5. And as you can see, 15,000 people there. But when I started to look at these tickets, some of the games I remembered a little bit. And some are a little bit more, distant to me. But the summer of 1979, I've often told you, I went to 31 straight games before they lost the game. So when I find a ticket stub from June 29th, I can assure you they won. Okay, so I don't know anything. I only have 2 ticket stubs. I have the World Series stubs, but these are the only stubs I can find from 1979, and I went to 41 games. I don't know why. I have every rock and roll stub. I don't know whether, my dad put them in a coffee can somewhere, and my son's going to find them at some point, like in the attic or whatever. So I had to look these games up. And, Luke, you're going to love this because my dad was a legendary cheapskate, which, you can appreciate, right? So
wait, does that mean you're calling me a cheapskate?
Well, when you get extra innings, I always see that you tweet out free baseball or
complimentary baseball without additional charge.
Well, what's the only thing you can do to get free baseball, other than wait for extra innings, right? You buy tickets for a doubleheader, all right? Yeah. So this is June the 29th, it's a Friday night. As you can see here, McGregor in the first end against Dave Stieb, 1 hour and 56 minutes. Very, very tidy, as you can see. 6-1 victory.
As many Scott McGregor games were.
Over the who was in that lineup? Let's take a look here. 1979, Alfredo Griffin, Rick Paccetti, Rico Cardi, the big boy. Otto Velez, his name was same front and back. John Mayberry, Danny Ainge. I heard he played some basketball.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Bob Baylor was going to be Cal Ripken before he was Cal Ripken, if you remember, and was sent off. And look at the Orioles did this for me. They let Kiko lead. That's another reason I went. Kiko led off. John Lowenstein, who I was also pissed when they fired him. Ken Singleton, I've been pissed for 30 years that they never hired him.
Look at those on-base percentages.
Doug
no one was talking
DeCinces.
about that back in the day, but look at that. Earl Weaver knew what he was. John Lowenstein, 404. Renicky, 429. Singleton, 425. I mean, there you go. That's how you construct a lineup.
You like
anyway,
that?
Go ahead.
You like that?
Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
You want to go with the Dipper? You want to put the Dipper in there?
Well, hey, he was in there for his defense, although his OBP probably should have been hitting a little bit higher in the order.
Look at McGregor being all efficient and shutting them down, man. Look at that. Perfect, right?
I mean, yeah.
Well, anyway, so that was the first game of the doubleheader. And then the second game of the doubleheader, which no doubt my dad said, let's get the hell out of here. We'll watch the last 3. Listen to the last 3 innings on the phone. Can we get a bus out of here early? It's already 9:30. We got to get out of here. So the second game of the Orioles obviously won it as well. And I probably said, Dad, we can't leave. Kiko's batting leadoff again. And Pat Kelly. Wayne Krenchicki made his way into the lineup that night. So did Dave Skaggs, who was an original number 8 wearer, by the way. And Stan the Man Unusual comes in to shut the door for Steve Stone, who went 8 2/3 and was chased away. Probably pissed that he lost a complete game there. Probably cost him some money.
You know what I look at, and this just speaks to today's game. There were a total of 7 strikeouts in that game between the two teams.
Got to make contact. Got to make contact with the ball, right?
You didn't have guys throwing 98. Just about every single pitcher, it feels like today.
Dave Skaggs coming off the bench in a World Series year and going 2 for 3. You can't beat that, So Luke, these are special tickets that I have here. This is a little later in 1979. Okay, this is September the 15th. And as you can see, if I do it the right way here, you'll see that they're reserve tickets in the outfield, which would lead you to believe that it was a special, special game in 1979. And I remember this. My dad had to work. My dad was in a weird shift at the point, and he had to work. And my mother took me out. It was the biggest game of the year. You know why it was the biggest game of the year? Do you know why? If you could look here on September the 15th, Luke, am I sharing the right 79 schedule with you here? That Steve Renko was the winning pitcher in a 10-2 loss. Mm-hmm. This was one of the 4 games I lost in 1979.
Oh, wow.
49,525 people there. Do you know why there were that many people there?
I do not.
It was the clinch game.
Okay.
And the clinch
that makes
came.
sense.
It rained
Mid-September.
that night. My mom and I were in the upper deck. We walked up the Wild Bill section. We wanted to be in Wild Bill section when they clinched, okay? And there was a rain delay, and the clinch happened when, like, the Indians won a game. Something happened in the 3 o'clock game that at 6 o'clock in the upper deck, the Orioles had already clinched. So it was sort of clinch weekend. Everybody bought up the tickets all weekend long to be there when the Orioles won and went nuts, right? That the night before was the night they spelled the Orioles that the Sensates is out there, and Frank Robinson, the famous picture, was the night before. I was not at that game. I went the next night, and they actually lost. This is a losing ticket stub. But so there's some 79 stories. That good?
That's great. It's great. I mean, I'm sure my mom always watches us on Facebook. 1979, that summer into the fall, that was when my parents dated. I mean, they got married in March of 1980. Their dates were
Hold on.
going
If
to the
they
ballpark.
were out there the night that Steve Trout threw the 6-hit shutout, hold on. I'll tell you that night. I got the box score right here. Let me look it up. August 13th. I remember these things. I'm a little like Mary Lou Henner, okay? I lost my first game on August the 13th, and this was Steve Rainbow Trout shutting down Scotty McGregor. I had a wonderful chat with Steve Trout about this. He said it was the best game he's ever pitched. Complete game, 5-hit, 1 walk, 7 strikeouts, shutout against the American League champion Baltimore Orioles in '79. So how about that?
That's a heck of a performance. Yeah.
So this is I'm going to leave this with you because I got to go grab Dennis. This is April 6, 1983. Made famous not only because we won the World Series, but also because you were born that year, right? So you were in your mother's stomach, right? April 6th. So does that sound like opening day to you, April 6, 1983?
That sounds like that could, that sounds reasonable.
You know why I know it wasn't opening day? Because my dad never went to opening day. Too many goddamn people out there. We're not going to. Hey, listen, we'll go the second night. We'll have plenty of room. And sure enough, Luke, if you are looking at Wednesday, April the 6th, if you're looking at my ticket stubs right there.
I love seeing the attendance.
You see the attendance? 7,904. And I rest my case that these tickets are legitimate. And this is my dad getting me a child ticket, even though I was above the age of 12. So it's illicit what my dad did. So, there you have it.
And probably
flawless.
Moved closer to the field with only 7,000 people.
And we won 11-1 because Flanagan beat up Dennis Leonard that night.
There you
Gura
go.
pitched the gem against Denny Martinez. Denny might have had some off-the-field issues at that point, and didn't perform well in the big game against 52,000 people. We lost 7-2 on the opener, but my dad took us at. You know what I want to know? The most important thing I want to know about April the 6th is game time temperature because it had to be 41 degrees, right?
Yeah.
53. It was 53 degrees. So
that's not bad for an April night.
Put on your jacket, pretend it's a Colts game.
Believe me, I have sat many April nights in the open press box at Camden Yards, which I can thank all the writers and media from when the ballpark was built for wanting an open press box and no heat. But
Luke, later on,
early April night games,
bring your coat. Things get crazy, I'll pull out all my Phillies ticket stubs for your brother-in-law, okay? Let him know, all right?
Absolutely.
I'll pull out old Phillies games here, and I promise you, whoever pitched on the other side was Dwight Gooden, Oral Hershey. That's the games I went to in Philly. Whenever they pitched, I got in the car and went.
Why not? Makes sense.
Or when Gary Carter showed up. He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. We do baseball around here. We do politics, sports, music, rock and roll. Rob Halford from Judas Priest. I'm chasing around Gina Shock from the Go-Go's. She's from Dundalk, hon, and they might go in the Hall of Fame. So we're going to do all that, and I might even break out some old tickets because it's the off season, and I'm having fun around here. I got my old Kansas City Royals ticket stub right here, 1983. 2 Hall of Famers, front and back end of that. Gaylord Perry pitched the front end. Don Sutton pitched the back end. How about, should have had him autograph that one. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking baseball because it's how we were built.